Greetings, namaste. Our next panel will look into how curators delicately balance their projects and work when it comes to culture. Abhishek Chaudhary, Chitra Ahantem, Junisha Kongvir, Mary Kurkalang, Teisinyo Keditsu, and Vidya Shivadas, please come and take your seats. The moderator, Vidya Shivadas, is a curator and director of the Foundation for Indian Contemporary Art, FICA, in Delhi. FICA is a not-for-profit organization that supports creative practitioners, researchers, curators, and educators working in the field of contemporary art, alongside developing education and outreach programs. Since 2005, Shivadas has curated exhibitions at Vadera Art Gallery, Kiran Nadar Museum of Art, Devi Art Foundation, Edinburgh Arts Festival, and Serendipity Arts Festival. Shivadas has been a visiting faculty at the School of Culture and Creative Expressions, Ambedkar University, Delhi, since 2013. Now I hand it over to you, Vidya, to introduce the speakers and take the session forward.
Thank you. So wonderful to be here. It's my first time in Shillong, and I'm really thankful to the Literary Festival and to Mary for bringing us here. Yeah, and thank you, Jerry. So, yeah, and I'm really, really excited to be moderating this discussion just because I can get to know all of these very lovely people on the panel that Mary has curated for us and put together. People who are working in very dynamic, creative, and critical roles as artists, curators, journalists, researchers, educators, poets, and hyphenated. They're doing more than one of these things, among other things. And I'm particularly interested in the coming together of curation and representation, these two words that have been kind of put together as the panel framework. Because of course in the art world we are speaking of the curatorial turn, and of course not just in the art world, but we're talking about it everywhere. Like we're curating menus, we're curating book lists and music playlists. So this word seems to have taken over, and it is what we're calling a curatorial turn today. And this is not necessarily only limited to an art exhibition, but it's really thinking about engaging with the exhibitory apparatus as such. So we're looking at this question of representation or content, but looking at it through method and form, and how objects and discourses are circulating, and how are we forming judgment, and how are we thinking about construction of history. So the question of circulation is coming back and is being very much tied into the modes of circulation. We're paying attention to the modes of circulation. And curation is very much about dialogue. It's about debate, and in that sense, it allows for an active engagement. And what's also been really interesting, even in my small curatorial career, I've just been thinking about how, when I started, I was curating exhibitions, working within a gallery or a museum, putting together artworks. But now the scope of that has shifted so much, and I'm thinking so much about, study groups or reading groups or learning environments or just bringing people together. So there's an expansion in that sense of creating environments and where people can come together, think, converse, act, and reimagine. So with this kind of setting, I really wanted my panelists to think about the relationship between representation and curation, even if they're not actively curating in that sense. And also thinking of curation really as this lively site of engagement, a kind of dramaturgy which is being played out in the present and is also being constituted by adjacencies and relationalities, that you're keeping things together, you're bringing voices together, you're bringing objects, and you're using all kinds of forms for that. And you're mobilizing readings, not just one reading, but multiple readings. Um, One of the most interesting thinkers would be a well-known anthropologist, James Clifford, and he comes up with this formulation in the 90s. It's not a new formulation, where he talks about museum as contact zones, and where he sort of rethinks the museum as an institution which could sort of bring a community back in conversation with the objects that are there. And so he gives this example of the Portland Museum, which has a very large Native American collection. And he says that it's very interesting that um, that the museum invites the Native American representatives to come back and say, okay, why don't you tell us how to, interpret these objects? Why don't you tell us the stories? We can rewrite the text. We can rewrite all of the narratives around the objects. And the Native American, they're also a part of a kind of a standing committee. They accept the invitation. But when they come to the museum, they're not interested in narrating the story the way that the museum wants to write the world text. They're interested in thinking about their present struggles of land, of very present political struggles, that the objects are part of that larger narrative. So they want to use the museum to kind of place that political struggle in the foreground. So it's it's a kind of tense moment for the museum in terms of, having this conversation and saying, okay, let's think about representation, but then how are the means of that actually going to be registered into the museum body? So, I mean, it's also about this act of curation is also then, or this act of talking back to that representational model is also creating a lot of shifts in the way that narratives are being told. So in that context, I just wanted to invite everyone on this panel, because each one of the participants here are doing really interesting work in terms of archiving, in terms of looking at cultural heritage, in terms of festivals and curating, or thinking about context for production. Um, so maybe I should start with Jonisha Kongwin, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Mass Media at St. Anthony's College here in Shillong. And she teaches live studio productions. She's also a photographer, and I was recently found out about this wonderful new collective called the AMA Collective, which is a space to realize and share stories and ideas by women photographers from the Northeast and the Darjeeling Hills. Today she's also going to be talking a little bit more about her work as part of the working committee of the Northeast India Audiovisual Archive. And this archive was established in 2019, and it's supported by the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and also the government of Meghalaya. And it's run out of the mass media department in the St. Anthony's College. So, Junisha, perhaps maybe you could share.
Thank you so much, Divya. Thank you, Kongmeri, and the organizing committee for inviting me here to speak on behalf of the archive. So I'll go straight to actually just a little bit of a history of how we envision the archive. Actually, we've been a department, the mass media department has been there for 25 years now, and it's a department which is constantly pumping productions after productions, photographs, and a lot of visual text and audio productions. So there's already been a lot of material that is just accumulating in the department. And in 2019, when the Sasakawa Peace Foundation approached us to start an archive, I think that was something that we needed, that push. And then from there, we decided that, because since we're a small department and, we have to teach as well. So archive is basically like, something that we're doing, as part-time, but actually it has turned out to be full-time at the moment. But I think that's how we started. And then from just collection of films, it led on to photographs, and it led on to audio clips, and it led on to even text, some text. So that's why I think when we look at our approach to archiving as from a place where I think there are very few archives. I would rather say personal collections. If we talk about archiving, I think archiving, as we know, is what is archiving? Is basically not just collecting material but also cataloging them and organizing them and interacting with that particular material. So as we are collecting all these material, we felt the need that it should go out into the public because this is a public archive. People need to come and people need to also interact. It shouldn't be just a repository or a home for these material, but it should be like active participatory from both the public as well as us in the archive. So what we do is basically we have started digitizing a lot of material. To start with films, we have a lot of collection of films all over Northeast. So that way we could engage even researchers from different states of Northeast India to basically collect, because many times when you go to film division, for example, you will never find films. Like, not all the films are there. So the only way to approach is basically to have these different people working in their own state and knowing about the scenario, knowing about what is happening in their state, even if it's just a short film, a really silly 15 minutes film. I think it needs to be archived in a way. So that's why we have kept these sort of researchers, and also I'm always trying to connect with people all over. It's a really small initiative, but we could already feel the impact in a way where people are getting to us and wanting to keep the material. So now I'll come straight to, basically that's what we do. So I'll come straight to the after organizing and cataloging, and the next part is basically the interactive part, which is the curation part, which we are interested to talk about at this juncture. So basically, like you introduced, we do work with the government of Meghalaya, and we're thinking of so many ways of how to get this material out there. Yes, exhibitions have been done on again and again, especially in Shillong. But we've never seen an exhibition that moves beyond Shillong, especially in the rural areas. So so first of all, since this is out there, I think if some of you are from Shillong, you can identify this is the Meghalaya calendar, which we curated out of all the material that we have collected in the archive. And since we turned 50, so we thought it's perfect time for, in a way, to share history through a calendar, and that is a form of exhibition. When we talk about exhibition apparatus, this is one way to get through all the homes of people, whether or you like it or not, it's there out there. And that's why we request people also, because ours is an oral tradition in terms of, our culture. They're very less written about us. In fact, when we were working on basically trying to find the history of Meghalaya, very little has been, I mean, yes, there are several books written, but as we are doing oral history project also, we just found out there's just so much more to the history of Meghalaya. That is why having a project like that, like, having from personal collections of families, bringing them to the archive and interacting with that particular material, I think that's how we approach the archive. If you can just move to the other slides. Yeah. So also, like I said, like I mentioned, bringing exhibitions. So this is how we approach exhibitions. It's a little bit off, but we just basically take to the outskirts. This is in Sidu next to the river Simsa, and we've just selected. Basically, I won't say I curated, but I selected the images and actually allow the subjects and the audience to curate it. Because so many anecdotes and also a lot of interesting stories that came out from this particular project is that when people could identify themselves, because a lot of the material, just going back a little bit, how we got this material is actually somebody was about to discard it away from a so place. I don't want to mention it, but we went to pick it up, took a year to clean it, took a year to digitize it, and till it actually turned out into an exhibition. So basically, there is no particular information that was written, or there is nothing. But we just assume, looking at the pictures, this must be from Garo Hills. So we took the Garo Hill materials to Garo Hills, and we allowed people to curate it. And that's when a lot of people could identify themselves, their aunts, their grandfathers, their grandmothers, and they would come forward and say, this is my grandfather. He actually brought, if you see here, Mr. Madak here, one of his nephews could spot him in one of the photographs and say, I think that was him in the 1960s, late 1960s. So he came, and you could see how people were actually, reacting to this kind of curation. curation is basically by allowing them, it's just not about us and keeping material out there, but also allowing them to see that, this is us, this is where we belong, and we've been photographed, but we've never seen ourselves in these photographs. So that is why the realization also our practitioners, as visual image practitioners, is also to be able to allow your subjects, your audience, to curate your work. So going forward, we did these a couple of exhibitions, which we took it all over the district in Meghalaya, with the help, of course, of the government of Meghalaya. We did get funding here and there, but we may do it whatever little. Even like the first one we did was basically no funding at all. We just went and we just have these tables. These are not even scanned images. They are like original images that we took, that we just cleaned up and we kept them because it was so important for us to share. Yes, you can move on. And you can see here, I have a little story here, which again talking about curation. You can have it other side. So, we talk about curation and how we allow the audience. So I'm just putting these images, in a series. And this one woman could put a slash that come they could do. It's not like that. That's not the way, It's supposed to be this, this, and this. And that humbles me. I think as somebody who just observe, learn, and just get that, get that connection with these people and how, and for them it's like image making is such a luxury, so to say. If you travel to outskirts of Meghalaya, you will find they hardly have photographs, It's such a luxury to even own photograph. So for them seeing their photograph, which was photographed by someone else, in a photograph now here, after many, many years, I think that is something that is very humbling. So I think these are the things that, our approach of how we do things is very, very important. So of course we have, in Shillong, we put up the Museum on Wheels, basically talking about the history of Meghalaya, because it's 50 years, so the government kept pressuring us, and you're an archive, please do something. And we did, whatever. And these collections, it's not actually from source from the government or from anywhere, but it's actually from families, family collections, that we went to meet a lot of these people and then actually talk about, ask about, what their involvement were or their grandparents' involvement were. So, and also we have a lot of, we can just skip all that. Sorry, this is an old presentation. So like I talked, so coming to the oral history part, which I talk about. So this is where basically we get a lot of, basically now we are writing. And we talk about representation, but we're actually allowing them to self-present themselves and not us representing them. So I think as an archive, it's very important to be able to, connect more and tell these stories and allow these narratives to come out as well. Because you can move on with the slide, sorry. So as you move on, for example, like it talks about the status of women here in 19. This was in late 1950s. This is from Pearlie Lingdo, and she basically was born in 1933. And she was one of the first women who worked at the forest department in the government of Assam then. And through these you can see that they were just, you could actually, when she was telling us stories like about how she was the only woman sitting in a room full of men and writing her exams, and when she got the job, and her parents were like, how can you go work? So these are the stories we're allowing out in the public to kind of, because like I said, there's no written, basic text about us, but it is through these personal collections. So these are basically her collection of her Perlimon, which this is another one in 1940s, which is basically she remembers herself and her uncle is an image enthusiast, and one of the few who have cameras back then, and he would take her sit, in the sideline, and this is a polo ground that time, we were playing polo. So these were the recollections and the stories that we share. So I think as an archive, our approach has been that way, very participatory. We keep calling for people to come forward and, to kind of basically, even if you want to digitize or you want to even create your own exhibition, we allow that to happen.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating. I mean, I think this whole, we see a lot of interesting projects that are taking place, and even the way that, of course, the archiving process is so slow and it's so painstaking because, it takes so much time to digitize, clean, find, scan and annotate images. but then also to turn this into a collective exercise. And we're seeing this happen across in the Northeast. And I mean, Photo Kathmandu, for example, has been doing really excellent work. Have been coming out with like very interesting exhibitions and archiving projects around women's histories as well as Dalit histories in Nepal. So it is a very interesting turn, and I can imagine, I mean, it's really wonderful. I don't know if you want to just add anything to your own orientation as a woman photographer and trying to think about that, how you might be approaching that field, and of course, looking at some of the material that you shared here as well.
I think, as I'm not a full-time photographer, basically, but yeah, I do photograph. It's something that I really love. But I think my approach has been over the years. I think has always been basically just looking inwards and trying to understand, like basically, if I photograph, because I myself don't like to do photograph. So I clearly would love it if somebody asked for a photograph. So I think my practice comes from there, from how I would feel if I were, to take a photograph. It's basically to ask, to basically get consent. So I think that's how, as a practitioner, I think I wouldn't want to go elsewhere. I wouldn't want to use my telephoto at this point. I'd rather take a prime and just like go here and, talk first, make conversations, and then, take these images. So basically it's storytelling for me, not really photograph, but it's basically to tell these stories.
Okay, so maybe I should turn to Mary, and who needs really no introduction, but as my role as moderator, I will do it. So she's of course the festival director, and I've known her for many years because she's been a very important figure in the Delhi cultural scene as well, and the publishing sector. And she's worked with Publishing International Cultural Exchange and the disability sector for 15 years before she started her own independent practice, Kublai, in 2012. And then she's been kind of going back and forth between Shillong and Delhi, and now based here more. Her work over the last 10 years has really been with the Northeast region, and she's been working in various capacities, curating, thinking about events and festivals, but also mentoring artists, youth, and creative practitioners in the region. So, Mary, really just wanted to understand your perspective also as somebody who's constantly going inside and outside, and you recently curated an exhibition on the Northeast and looking at intangible cultural heritage practices from the Northeast. That was the kind of brief, so it was very interesting to see the way you interpreted that as well. But perhaps if you want to share anything about the idea of curation and representation and how you deal with it.
I think this could be, something that we could talk on for a very, very long time, but I'll keep it really crisp because there are many of us. And just to live on to this, this idea of curatorial and representation, let me not take too much time. I'm just going to speak to three things in terms of, how I see the various threads, because when people ask me, I say, what do you do? So there are some people who only know me through the publishing space, some people know me only in the social sector, and there are people who only know me in the art and culture world. I tried all three very, very happily, and I actually went independent over 10 years ago to do that, because I feel that nothing is disconnected, and everything is connected, and I wish that people would see that more, because the possibilities are so much more. So I think today someone commented on the program twice to me, and it really made me happy that there's so much of everything here. And actually, it doesn't only always have to be one thing. Everything can be interpreted in so many different ways. And when I started my career, I'd say it was very important for me. I started when I was very young in the disability sector. And the first NGO I worked with in Delhi. And I was in fundraising department, and I still remember my department head telling me, there was very small, it was a very small department with 3 people. But my orientation to fundraising was, we have to be very, very sure about who we don't take from, and everything else we just have to keep quiet. And so therefore, because it was looking at disability, we had to really think about who we would not take from. And I think that lesson for me was very, very important, to remember what I need to exclude in order to include. And the other thing that I learned was, working in a disability sector is that, the world disables you. It is this word disability, that actually the world can be disabling for you. So even now, as I'm in this venue and I see stairs and I see places where it's not wheelchair friendly, it's not friendly for people who can't see, who can't hear. And I think about it because all of us every day are creating spaces that can either be inclusive or exclusive. So I think my journey, and thank you very much, Jerry, for talking about the forest today. That through these years, many years, and I've sort of been part of international cultural centers where I've represented other countries, and it really actually I didn't really want to start off with being like this identity, being this Khasi woman or being a Northeastern, but I think that because I've been striding these worlds, I've been pushed towards actually understanding, because if I don't understand my own culture, how do I represent anyone else? And so therefore, I think that when I'm constantly thinking that there's always a context, that what I do in Shillong cannot be the same thing that I'm doing in Tura. It cannot be the same thing that I'm doing in Delhi, and it can't be the same thing I'm doing in Berlin. So therefore, and all of these places have its own context, and I think that living in this country, India, and this region or everything, we are always having to balance it, and representation, what does it mean? I think that also that for me, the sum total of truth of anything to be complete is just that how much it's the truth really is this, that many perspectives that you present can only add to the truth, but it is never one truth. And so therefore, in the ways that I look at curation and representation, I know it will never be perfect, but it is just constant work. And I think the forest that Jerry spoke about, the books I've read, and the ways that like it's also having seen so much culture in so many places, that now I think after 25 years of practice, I call myself a curator, because I feel that I'm picking a little bit from that forest, but it's still an imperfect act, and it will always be. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Maybe I'll just move on to Theisino Kedistu. And she's from Nagaland. She's the assistant professor in the Department of English at Kohima College. And she has a PhD in cultural studies from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Bombay. But she's also been doing very interesting things with poetry, and has a very interesting, very popular Instagram avatar, Mekhala Mama, where she's been looking at the whole indigenous Naga textiles and women's narratives through that kind of social media campaign. She has also published 2 books of poetry, and her research really focuses on contemporary Naga culture, indigenous knowledge, and oral and written literatures of Nagaland. She's also been writing folk tales and has written a very beautiful Angami folk tale that she's reimagined. So I don't know, I think maybe just to focus on Mekhala Mama, because I was just looking at it before this session, and Mary was sharing with me, and it seems really interesting in terms of, and we just wanted to show the Instagram page. Perhaps, I'm sure many people here might know of it, but it's quite interesting the way that you think about textiles and how you also link it to the question of body and Naga identity in your own body, and you kind of bring this whole discourse into a very personal space at one level. And I just wanted you to talk about perhaps this particular project or any other that you want to speak about in terms of how you're addressing these questions of Naga identity.
Thank you, Vidya. It's so interesting that you quoted James Clifford, and for me, that was very significant. And what he says about museums as contact zones, I see social media as a very sort of promising contact zone, and that's what I try to do with this account. Because in terms of when you want to challenge people to think about how we are represented, or what does representations of ourselves mean, social media is just, it's ready-made, it's already there, it's already in everyone's hands. So, and I think for Mary, for me, I start from here, I start as a Naga woman, I'm a very proud Naga woman, and for me, everything stems from that. But especially for Nagas, in terms of identity and culture, and our sort of space in imagination and discourse, we more or less, it's not possible to think of the Naga person or the Naga body, and especially the Naga woman's body, without thinking of ethnography, and our representation in ethnographic either writing or images. So especially as a Naga woman and my body, I find that this is if I want to re-represent, or if I want to sort of question representations, dismantle or disrupt expectations, this for me is my experiment, in terms of what should a Naga body look like? Should it be covered? Should it not be covered? Because I had a very interesting experience when I went for a conference where a European anthropologist came to me and said, "Oh, but why are you dressed like this?" I was wearing pants and shirts and everything. And he was like, "You should wear your beautiful dresses, you should wear, the things that the women from your part of the world," because anyway, I have no idea what he meant. But for me, I clearly felt like, this, sort of this kind of Western discursive gaze on the Naga woman's body is very sort of, it has a lot of power. And so for me, it's, how do I disrupt that gaze? How do I, one. The second is also, very often when I go out, I meet non-Naga friends, or as we say, our Indian friends, they say, yeah, wow, you Naga girls, you're so, you're so fashionable, you're so, and especially when I'm interacting with feminists from, sort of the West, I think their battle is different in the sense that for them, makeup, fashion sort of conforms to patriarchal expectations of how a woman's body should be. But in the Naga context, it's the opposite. For us, women are supposed to be plain, we are supposed to be modest, we are supposed to be, sort of not so attractive, just sort of don't draw attention to yourself. So that is one of the reasons why most Naga women, and very interesting, I wish I could have found that clip, but there was actually a small little letter in one of our newspapers in Nagaland where a man has written, he's actually taken the time to write a letter to our newspaper to say, why in the world are women dressing like this in church? They're dressing like they're going to the club, and I thought, this is fantastic, So for Naga women, the reason we're so fashionable is this is our way of answering patriarchy and patriarchal expectations of what a woman should be. I'm also married, I'm also a mother, so in terms of, how a married woman, a married Naga woman should be, what should my body look like? Should I not wear leather? Can I not wear black lipstick? And I love social media because it's an interactive space, where people can, and I love what people do, as in they also curate your own material, and they do many things. So one gentleman commented that, for me, I really don't like black lipstick. And of course he meant, I don't like black lipstick on you. And I replied, yeah, it's not for everybody. You shouldn't wear it if you're not comfortable wearing black lipstick, But yeah, for me, I do a lot of other things, but I think within the context of this panel, this is my experiment, and I'm constantly trying to disrupt. And of course, I'm mixed. I'm from two different tribes. I'm married, very proudly married to a Khasi. And I think in the Northeast, we also don't talk enough about how cosmopolitan we really are. We're all a mix of many things. And my children's book actually draws from an Angami folktale that tells about the common origin of the Plains people and the Hills people. Now, if you're from the Northeast, you know how contentious that is, And for me, as somebody who is from a mixed tribal background and also married to somebody from another community in the Northeast, I felt that it was so important for my children to remember that at the end, we are all of the same blood. We are all humans. we all have the same kind of ancestral parentage. And so for me, that was the folktale I thought I want to turn into a children's book. But even with my mixing and matching, if I can just take the sort of, I think that would be your left hand, the uppermost left hand corner. Um, I attended the wedding of the man was, wait, the father is Angami, the mother is half Khasi and half Mizo.
Okay.
And the bride is half Tangkhul and half Angami. So I've combined everything. I've worn a Tangkhul shawl, I've worn a Mizo puanche, I've worn an Angami necklace, and I've worn a Khasi paila. And because I think that married mothers should wear leather, I wore leather. So, but in terms of the kinds of narratives that women have created from before, for Naga women, weaving is an entirely, sort of exclusively female domain. And so if a woman refused to weave a shawl for a man or refused to give that shawl to a man, she denied him identity. And how powerful is that, in our patriarchal setup? So just drawing from that tradition, I think I see fashion as, a very sort of powerful medium for communicating identities, for, sort of negotiating cultures. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really very exciting, and also I think, yeah, just the way that you're using social media is really fascinating. Moving on to Chitra Anantham, you've already been speaking right now, and I think everybody again knows you. You're a very well-known journalist, writing for Imphal Free Press and other publications, and really talking about the socio-political context of Manipur. So I mean, and of course, coming from journalism, and also you've been writing a lot of book reviews and hosting an online show called Books and Conversations, on social media. Yeah. Perhaps, I don't know if you want to share something, and then.
Yeah, hello. So yeah, I'm the odd one out in the sense that I don't do curation, but this whole thing about representation, the extreme point also is I'm more interested in what is representation and what is appropriation. Who gets to tell whose stories and how and for what end? That's something that's perennially, been very important and significant for me. I do. What happens is, for example, I come from Manipur, but like Theo said, it's not enough for me to say that I'm from Manipur and hence I represent what a Manipuri is. I can't, because I again belong to a specific community called the Meitei, and amongst the Meitei I belong to a little privilege where even though I belong to a socioeconomic class of a lower middle class, but I at least got a convent school education, which means I'm able to have this language that I can speak to you. Because a lot of Meiteis are not able to speak English the way I do. It's because the language, so then language becomes a point of conflict, which is why if you go on Twitter, you won't find a lot of Meiteis on Twitter. You'll find a lot of other tribal communities on Twitter because English for them is much more easier because the church is there, the language is there. But for the Meiteis to be on Twitter, it's difficult. It's and hence, I came onto Twitter because a lot of friends were like, there's this lot of misrepresentation been happening. And because I come from a journalistic background, and we have this term called parachute journalism. So a lot of people flying down whenever there's something big happening, and then they become the master storyteller, the only definitive account of the conflict in Manipur, the only definitive expert on the sports in Manipur. Like, people will come randomly and speak to a few sports person and say, like, as recent as this year, there was this outlet, not a mainstream outlet, but still they got a lot of visibility on social media. So they did this story and said that Manipuris excel in sports because of their genes. And that is something very laughable because we share the same genes. We share, with the exception of Vidya, we share the same genes. But to excel in sports and to say that it's the other thing around, that racial thing is being used to say that we, and because we eat rice. And the climate. I mean, it's pathetic. And you know, and I know, all of us from this region, why people from Northeast India excel in sports is that there is no other freaking way to have a life. You know that if you excel in sports, you get a job quota. You get placements in the railways, and now you get placements in the state services. And you get promotions very soon, and you don't have to attend office. Yeah? So there are these stories that come from not understanding the region, and it comes from this entitlement that comes that in my CV, and I'm talking about the spiritual journalists, that in their CV they have to write, reported from a conflict region. So in a sense, they are in no way different from the army people who come posted to the Northeast so that they can have a medal to show for their work. So this were the kind of things that I have been questioning for long. But the interesting thing also is that as long as you are questioning the larger narrative, there are bouquets for you. The moment I turn this representation into the patriarchal questioning of the way the Métis society works, I got trolled when the word trolling was not invented. There was this incidence of rapes happening in Gurgaon in the call center. There was this case happening. And so everybody got worked up and said, oh, our girls getting raped there in Gurgaon and da. And it went into this whole racism thing. I'm very staunchly against racism. But to talk about rape as just a racist thing, because in that same week, there was 2 rapes happening in Manipur by our community. Nobody talked about that. And then 5 days after this incident and all the hoo-ha that happened in the Manipuri media, it so turned out that the girl was from Mizoram. And all the hoo-ha died. And I was then writing an op-ed for the Imphal Free Press, and I said, a rape is a rape is a rape. That's it. And then got posted on a website, and there was a polling that happened and said, should Chitra now be raped? This was in 2002. So when we talk about, this whole thing about curation, I mean, because I come from a background where I'm constantly asking who represents us and who do I represent when I go on a platform where there is not many of us. It becomes very important for me then that I should also understand this little and big points of conflict. Very recently, the only thing that I've curated, I would say, is there was this media outlet that asked me to compile a list of 75 books from Indian literature that defines the 75th year of Indian independence. And I said, okay, when somebody asks you, the immediate thing on your mind is, oh, the Arundhati Roy and the Vikram Seth and everybody. And then I said, no, why am I falling into this trap? Because I come with all this history, with all this baggage, and if I go into that, it's going to be problematic. And so then I said, is it okay? I went to my commissioning editor and I said, is it okay if I go and do, that I do it every state and union territory of India, and you give me total freedom. You don't question who I put and who I don't put. And so we went, and so I went to each state and union territory and then compiled by gender, by the themes, by the languages. Because when we even say a state, forget about us, when you say a state, and say even Jammu Kashmir, for instance, there are so many languages there. There is Dogri, there is Urdu. So I went to that, and believe me, that was so much appreciated. And then I realized that, okay, to be a curator, it takes a lot of responsibility because it's not a listicle. A listicle is so damn easy, You just need to go to Google Baba and then put your listicle and then decide, okay, yeah. But curation, when you come to, and when you come from a point of knowing that why does representation matter, and then I think that's where you put in. And so even for the book, this online book thing that I host, I also ensure that I do, invite independent booksellers, and and booksellers. I started out with saying, okay, let's invite booksellers. Then I thought, oh, if I say booksellers, then every other big chain will want to be there. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to bring in small independent booksellers. And I had Raman of Rachna Books and Leonard Fernandez of the Dog Years Bookshop. And it was a huge hit because people also wanted to know about them. And we were all laughing because at the end of it, we were saying, and I said, okay, so whom would you recommend that I bring on this show? And I was like, and both of them are like, do not bring the Delhi bookstore people here on the show. So we were all laughing about it, but yeah, that's something that I wanted to share. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that brings out a lot of questions also in terms of, and even what Thay brought out in terms of, thinking about both representation from within and outside. So you're also thinking about the question of gender or the complexities within certain kinds of groups, and not just thinking about representation from the outside. Our final panelist, Abhishek Chaudhary, he's an independent artist. He's the youngest in this group, I think. Independent artist and designer from Assam, and he's based out of Guwahati. And he's trained as a designer, and now he's been working on this very interesting, it's a new, not that new, in 2018 he's co-founded the Guwahati Art Project to build a community for artists and for aspiring creative professionals from the city and the state. And they've also been doing a whole series of gap talks that they've been curating. And again, it's part of a very interesting movement in the Northeast that we're seeing of collectives forming, propelled by a lot of the young people who are also articulating and creating a community among themselves, but also telling their own stories. So Abhishek, if you want to share anything about Gap and that experience.
Sure. Firstly, thank you so much, Vidya and Mary, for having me on the panel. I was telling Mary before coming that I'm so terrified of coming here in such great company of people who have been doing curation for so long and who have been developing their craft for so long. So I feel I'm like such a small player in this field. But curation has become part of my life more recently, like 2018. And this is something which I never thought I would be doing until a chain of events which sort of changed and the course of my life. Like you mentioned, like I was trained in design. I was one of the few lucky people who actually got to pursue design with my parents' support. And this whole reason behind starting GAP was also to counter and bridge that gap which I felt when I was a younger person, when I was 14 and 14, 15, and that's around the time when people start thinking like, okay, aage ka kya socha hai? And these kind of things. So there are some pictures I think we'll talk about it sometime. But so around that time, I knew that I had this flair for art and I like to draw, and people had been encouraging about it, but I had no idea about what to do. And also this lack of visibility of creative practitioners that I had around me at that time growing up in Guwahati. I didn't know who to approach. I didn't know, internet was very scarce at that point of time. I didn't know what kind of research to do. Thankfully, I had my parents' support and my father did that side of research, and I was lucky to meet a counselor who mentioned the word design to me. And at that point of time, I didn't even know what design meant. For me, it was just fashion design. And and because your worldview is also shaped by the kind of circumstances and context that you live in. If you're in Delhi, you get this exposure much before, or in Bombay much before. You've seen designers around you. You've seen events happen around you. Where you get in Guwahati, unfortunately, we didn't have most of those things, especially in that time. When a lot of us know that Northeast was very different. So when we saw things have started changing. There's been a new era of calm and peace, touchwood, has returned to the Northeast, and a lot of young people have returned and started doing things. I wanted to do something to fill this void and to build a community, because being an artist in a space like this and not knowing there are other people like you around you can be very isolating, and also it does not lead to your growth, and to the growth of the entire ecosystem. Like there is no ecosystem. So I started using social media. Of course, like, you know, we were from that first generation of social media users. We had Orkut, Facebook, and I just started connecting with people through that. People who I found like from Northeast doing cool work in the creative space, artists, filmmakers, musicians, whoever I thought was like, you know, something new that they were doing. And I could see that there were a lot of people, but none of them knew each other. Everyone thought like, you know, there's no scene back home, so I'm just going to come to Bombay and do my thing. And that was the case for a lot of people. So I said, we need to have a community first. Like, you know, there's a lot of things that we need to do to grow a scene over here. First, we need to have a community. We need to know that we exist. We need to know that there's another person like you. And I'm a big time fan of collaboration. This GAP happened because there were 4 other people with similar mindsets, with similar dreams, who were there, who we sat on a cafe and we were just discussing with each other and like, yeah, like I have been feeling the same thing too, and we should do something. And from that, I also got the confidence to do things which I never thought I would. So with that, the Gaudi Art Project was born, and like one of the name was actually suggested by one of our friends who unfortunately passed away like just 2 days before we had this conversation. So in his memory also we started this thing because he would have wanted it. And after that, like our efforts have been like lot of our presence has been through social media. It has been one of our it's a great privilege to be born in this time because compared to say traditional institutions where you need to have some kind of physical space and everything, we have none of those things. We are like from the Uber generation, you know, we don't own anything, we have present still. So a lot of our things have happened through social media discussions, and then we would have smaller gatherings in spaces in the city, and it's always changing. So that's also exciting that we get to meet different people. We can have the pictures now. I think we can like illustrate some of the different events. And one of the greatest things about these events that the focus is not on teaching or like, you know, because I don't come there as like, you know, oh, I'm going to teach all of you art, and like that's not the point. The point is to first have a dialogue, come together, talk, and through that process, if we can like, you know, share some skill, I invite some kind of experts, I invite some kind of so this is actually so the Gap Talks, the our annual talk event which happens. We try to invite speakers and designer practitioners from the region and from, again, quote unquote, the Indian scene, because let's face it, there is that divide. And when there's a design conference, we hardly see representation from, say, Indian, Northeastern creators like that. So I wanted to create a space where we put them on the same stage. And you know, we want to also shed that label that we are Northeast designers. So we put, like, you know, part of the curation process is that we have a balance between people who we invite. And I don't want it to be a Northeast thing also, because we're good enough to stand on the same level as anyone. So we have international guests as well. And so here's Ayaz Basrai. He's like one of the most inspiring industrial designers who's doing a lot of work in and initiating a lot of dialogue around design and conversations around the future of Indian cities and design. And one of the previous picture was actually one of the things which we had done before the Gap Talks was to do a young designer spotlight, where as a prequel to the event, we did like an Instagram live session where we highlighted the work of some of young Northeast designers whose work we liked, and we had conversations with them. And the whole point of Gap was also, one was to build a community, but also to offer a stage and let the world know that there is, this is Nori Norpu, who's also actually the artist who collaborated with me for the Shillong Lit Fest branding. So that beautiful lady over there you see has been illustrated by Nori. So there's been a curation process there also, because, you know, curation is like a ongoing process, right? You don't sit down one day and it's like, I'm going to curate. You have constantly have these people coming and say, okay, this person is great, and I will bring them on board whenever there is something interesting coming that fits the context and the theme. And when it comes to representation, obviously, like Mary said, like, it is a process. You're learning constantly, and you can never be perfect. After all the effort, still there'll be some people who will be disappointed in you, and it'll be like, you didn't include so and so, or why need to call me? So, but for us, the process is always to have some kind of a balance. Representation has been very important because it was founded by four cis-het male, and so it was very important for us to, like, bring in other voices, talk to other, and whenever we curate, we try to make it a very participatory process. Like, some of like our members, people who attend our events, become part of the core team is very organic. So we also ask them, would you want to see this person? Who would you want to see? So it's a very there's a lot of engagement there, and social media has been a great help in that way. And yeah, and it's a constant process, and we are hoping to do more stuff, and hopefully have bigger gatherings, maybe something like this in the future. You never know, and work with each one of you at some point in the future. So, yeah.
Inshallah.
So, inshallah. So thank you. If there's
Yeah,
anything
no.
else.
Yeah, no.
I'll just want to. So this was actually a zine workshop we did, and which is actually where I met Mary. So she was one of the attendees at this event, and this was some of the zines that were created by the attendees, and it was just a 2-day event. And these some of the people had never even done zines or known about zines in their life, and and we were absolutely blown away by the range of the kind of the content that came out. Like, there was a trans okay please. It was a zine created by a young trans artist, and there was something called the Dumb Bitch Manifesto, which was done by this girl who is like, she's a feminist, and she's like, often beautiful girls are labeled as dumb bitch, and so she created like a manifesto, like a feminist manifesto for all the dumb bitches of the world. So very interesting, and it's very good to see a lot of young people accepting and trying out and finding these avenues today, which a lot of us we didn't have as when we were kids. So yeah, so hoping to do more of this.
Thank you, thank you. I think I'm somehow being told that we're very short of time, though I feel like we've just begun this conversation. So it's just like a little bit of a small insight into each person who's here. But yeah, it's really wonderful, and I mean, I think everywhere it's also very interesting to see this movement in terms of a lot of young people forming collectives, but also then sort of, speaking back to things and speaking back to inviting people, creating their own forums. It's happening in various different institutions. And definitely, I mean, social media has given people the opportunity to speak and to create their own means of representation. So I was, just looking at young photographers from Sri Lanka, and this is the entire generation that has come out of the civil war, which uses Instagram as a gallery and, has been able to really connect their practices to various people across the world. So it's quite interesting in the way that these movements are happening, and definitely I think conversations among all of the people in the region and people like me from outside who can come and learn and listen is wonderful. So thank you again for listening, and I hope we didn't delay the next session too much. And
Thank you for having us.
thank you, everyone.